Hello, welcome to Picture Me Coding with Eric Aker and Mike Mull. Hello, Mike. Another week of us together here.
Hey there.
Mike, I invited a friend of mine, Kyle Willcox, on the show. Kyle and I work together. He's got a really interesting background, and I'm excited that he came on the show today. Kyle, welcome. Thanks for coming on.
Hey, been listening for a little bit.
I am like really bad at interrupting you. I don't know what it is. It's like there's something about the way you phrase things. I just jump in. I'm like you're like my worst interrupting temptation somehow.
No, I feel the same way with you. Actually, I don't know. I think I just like want to. I always start talking too fast too, so I'll try to stop. But yeah, let's
No,
do it.
no, no, no. I want to hear from you. Okay, so Kyle, you have worked both inside the Salesforce platform and outside the Salesforce platform. And actually, unlike most of the people I've worked with in my career, you've also got a computer science degree. So, can you tell us a little bit about your background?
Oh, absolutely, yeah. So I went to the University of North Carolina of Wilmington. I really don't feel like it's anything too special to be thinking about compared to you guys, because even though both of you guys are mostly self-taught, you guys is truly the best I've ever seen in a way. I think about you guys and
Oh, you're
like,
not allowed to say that on our show. But okay, continue.
all
All right,
right,
we'll keep
anyway.
going. We'll just keep on going.
Say more. Say more.
But yeah, I went there from 2011 to 2015, and I had a good experience. I felt like I discovered a love for programming there through some friends, and late nights at the computer science lab were favorite memories there. And I kind of went to school thinking I'd be an iOS developer because that was like the hot. Everyone's one beautiful app away from changing their life, and it seemed like a really exciting, easy thing to do because Swift just came out, and so I got like really into that in my free time and kind of built like a few POCs and had a lot of fun with that. But it seemed like the industry kind of got oversaturated with people trying to do that.
Real fast, yeah.
There weren't too many good jobs for professional iOS experience.
You found it hard to get a job when you graduated from college?
Maybe a little bit. I think I was also because I was trying to already move out to California, but within my small town of Wilmington, North Carolina, it was hard to find an iOS gig.
Now you mentioned trying to move out to California, and that was one of the things that really, like, I perked my ears up when you told me how and why you moved out to California. Can you tell us a little bit about that? I don't think Mike knows about this.
It was always seemingly, you know, a selfish reason of just wanting to skimboard. Skimboarding is, for those who don't know, it's a very small sport. It's like a mix of skateboarding and skimboarding. Sorry, skateboarding and surfing, where you take a very short, thin carbon fiber
Very
board.
surprisingly heavy board. Maybe they're not heavy for pros. Like you're on the pro side. The one every time I pick those up, I'm like, how is this piece of wood this heavy?
Yeah, see, that's your experiences from the older days when they were heavy. Now they're made of carbon fiber, and I swear they're almost too light. They're like
Okay,
to
okay.
the point where I like, yeah, put sand on it to get down. But yeah, you run at the waves, try to surf them, and then do skateboarding tricks on them. But
So you moved to California for skimboarding. Is that right? Like
yeah,
Point Break, the kid moves from Arizona to Hawaii for surfing. You moved from North Carolina to California for skimboarding. Is that right?
yeah, I think it respect is kind of silly sounding. Like I get
I
a lot
think
of
it's
that.
rad. I think it's so rad. I've never met anybody who has a story anything like that. So I find it amazing. I find it a cool story. Can you
Yeah,
tell me a
and
little bit? Go ahead. Go ahead.
I was just gonna say, I think I remember my parents being like, I kind of really love marine life, and I was really into marine biology, and I was probably gonna do that. And then my dad's like, "You're never gonna live in California with a marine biology degree," and I was like, "Oh man, he's right." So I might as well do something that kind of support my hobbies with. And sister at the time was getting into computer science, and I kind of always thought it looked cool and interesting. And I never started writing code before, other than like making a MySpace page. I never really wrote code before computer science. But it's funny because I went to college and then I had friends. I remember this very particular moment in the cafeteria where I had two of my closest computer science friends arguing about who really was a. One of them claimed to be a software engineer and he was still in college. And the other one was like, "You're not a software engineer. You just probably just like fixed little bugs and like did like little silly work for them. And he's like, no, I really did. I wrote code. And like, it was just like, what? Why are you guys fighting over this? This isn't crazy to me. Like, why is this something to argue about? But then later on, I was like, wow, like,
15 years later, people still argue about that.
yeah, yeah,
I
yeah.
introduced myself to one of the parents at the pool the other day, and, he's like, "What do you do?" And I went, "Oh, I'm a software developer." And he was like, "Are you a developer or a software engineer?" And I was like, "Are you in the industry?" He's like, "No, I just have a friend who works at Google, and he always talks about this distinction." And I was like, kind of, sort of low key offended, like he just met me, and you don't know anything about me, and you want to know if I'm in the elite club that you've heard about. All right, Kyle, two questions about skimboarding. Number one, are skimboarders obsessed with like amateur meteorology and oceanography like the way surfers are? Or is it a little less nerdy about that weather conditions and bathymetry and stuff like that? You get into that too?
Oh my gosh, I have a friend and I who constantly argue and have theories about like why this beach is better here and then, and we're so nerdy about like swell direction and like, oh, it's 180 degrees. That's perfect for this spot. We got to go here right now. We're driving all the way to
Okay, all right.
Malibu. Like,
So maybe even more so than surfers. Now you have been in skimboarding competitions. You've competed, right? I mean, you moved out here not just to pursue this as a hobby, but to pursue it as like a profession. Is that right?
I mean, there's never going to be money to be made in skimboarding. It was definitely always a hobby, but I guess profession in the sense that can win money, and I have won like a very tiny amount of money, but not like to the point where I could ever sustain myself or ever plan to. There are some
Mm.
skimboarders that even there's people that are like world champions 4 times in a row, and they they're making money through YouTube or sponsorships, and there's never you can never win enough competitions in a year to sustain yourself, even if you like food everyone.
Is it dangerous? It's like really shallow water, right? So you bang your head on the ground and stuff. It seems pretty dangerous, especially when the shore break is pretty big. People are doing pretty crazy airs and tricks and stuff. Like you could do, land on your head, I would imagine.
Oh yeah, I've kind of been thinking about that. I know some people that wear helmets, but I definitely have snapped my ankle completely when I first moved out here. In fact, I did that within the first 2 months of being in this bigger shore break, and it was really humbling. It made me almost like give up skimboarding at a point, but then I was like, I've come too far. I just gotta power through this. And
I'm imagining like a Point Break style movie. Kyle moves out to California.
Do you have to worry about like jellyfish and stingrays and stuff like that, or is that?
definitely stingrays.
And then, okay, so one more skimboarding question. I've never really met anybody who is like way into skimboarding. There's a beach. I always forget the name of it. You know it. We call it Casas. I don't know what the skimboarders call it, right? By the Museum of Art in La Jolla.
The wall,
Right by
yes.
the wall, right. There's a huge wall there. I've seen the skimboarders out there and they're doing some pretty rad stuff. Seems like just a bunch of kids having a good time. Does remind me of early days of skateboarding. How big is this community if you could kind of put your finger on it? I mean, I'm guessing it's not that big.
I'd say in San Diego, there's probably roughly like 100 people.
That's pretty small.
Yeah, and compared to surfing, it's cool because, like, as you know, Eric, going and paddling out at San Diego, no one's gonna say hi to you. No one's gonna
Yeah.
come up to you and be like, "Hey, you're surfing with me in my spot. That's cool." It's
Yeah,
like no one would
exactly.
ever do that.
Yeah.
But skimboarding,
Yeah.
you see another skimboarder, they're gonna be like, "Hey, oh, I see you're doing this with me.
You're
This is
also
cool."
participating in this very small community. Welcome.
Yeah,
Like that kind of
yeah.
feeling? That's pretty cool. I don't know. I just find it a rad story because honestly, I've never heard anything like it. Study computer science, move out to California to be a pro skimboarder. All right. Kyle, we usually talk about music on the show. Would you like to tell us about any of the music you listen to or have been listening to lately?
Yeah, for sure. I'm kind of embarrassed to say the name, but I've been obsessed with this band lately called the Viagra Boys, and they have a couple interesting albums. One that came out recently, but there's another one called Cave World that I just the more I listen to it, the more I like want to listen to it. They're kind of described as post punk, which is kind of like a very loose way of saying like they're punk, but they're just more modern, I guess. I'm curious to know what you guys think of them. I think did you get a chance to listen to that album at all?
I listened to it. I've also listened to the newer one quite a bit. At one point, actually, was going to mention it on the show, and then I think something else supplanted it. But yeah, the new one got really good reviews, and so it reminds me. I think you'd like it, Eric, because it reminds me a little bit of sort of a rock version of Aesop rock. So it's like it's got these really surprising and interesting lyrics that are a little bit quotable.
Are you an Aesop Rock fan, Kyle?
Yeah, I am. I definitely enjoy that artist a lot. But yeah, you're right. You kind of they kind of sound like Devo, but maybe with like a more modern, and they do have very like, witty lyrics that you kind of have to take with a grain of salt. I think they're being ironic with a lot of their lyrics. Like if you listen to their lyrics and don't think that we're supporting any of the insane things that they say in their lyrics, but I'm sure they're kind of saying it in a way that mocking. Be clarified, they don't actually feel.
So, Kyle, I wanted to have you on here. I wanted to talk about Salesforce and also your work outside of Salesforce. Salesforce, interesting platform. But before we get to that, can you tell us like a little bit about your work history, how you got into doing the work you eventually did for a lot of your career? Like, what was the first job you had? Where did you start doing, and what did you kind of want to do? I guess you mentioned you want to do iOS, so maybe we start there.
So I had a skimboarding friend who was a software engineer already, and he was like, "Hey, come intern at this pretty cool for the area. There's not many options there, but they were just a startup that did public safety software with .NET and some Angular. This is the first version of Angular when it kind of first came out, so that was exciting to me a little bit. And then I did that for a couple years. I enjoyed it, but as I graduated and began looking for jobs, a bunch of people from that first internship were like, "Hey, you should come to this hackathon." Like multiple people reached out to me, and I was like, "Why do they want to bring me to the company so bad?" And I kind of heard about Salesforce and just the name. Ew, Salesforce, like that doesn't sound cool. Like I'm not a sales guy. I don't want anything to do with that. But but then I like started looking at it and they mentioned the hackathon. I was like, hey, I'll go to that. I even spent like 3 days like learning Salesforce to prepare for the hackathon. I was like, I'm just a competitive person, I think a little bit, and I'm gonna kill it. I'm ready for this. Like, let's do this. And then I get there and it's some knockout JS app, which I had kind of floundered on, but didn't do too bad. And they gave me an offer that was kind of pretty good compared to everything else that I had been offered, which was like standards at the time for.
The hackathon was put on by a company. Is that what you're
Oh
saying?
yeah,
And then
yeah.
maybe you said it. I just missed it.
No, I didn't even say it. The company was called Encino, which maybe some of you guys have heard of, but they built a platform on the Salesforce platform. They advertise themselves as a banking platform on top.
Yeah, I've heard of that company. Definitely.
I didn't really know like anything about Salesforce beyond starting with that hackathon. So having to experience Salesforce through Encino was kind of funny. I'm very thankful for that experience because it's I came to realize that most implementations of Salesforce are not to sell Salesforce to other companies. They're to fulfill a business need for an already existing company. And so like building really complicated things on top of Salesforce and having like a really extensive code base on top of Salesforce is kind of a unique experience in some sense because you're usually most other implementations of Salesforce are for like we don't need this to go anywhere. We just need it to work for us and our particular business need. But building a platform on top of Salesforce that's like extensible and open to customization and further customization with our customer support team.
I want to talk a little bit about the history of Salesforce here. I want to sort of pause because a lot of our listeners may not have actually interacted with Salesforce. They probably have heard of it. They may not really know what it's like, and they may even be surprised that we're talking about it here. So I want to talk about what is interesting about this platform for a couple of software developers like Mike and I. So I didn't realize this. I was reading the official Salesforce history page. The company started in 1999, and that was like right in the dot-com boom era. They started in San Francisco. I did know that the person who started the company had actually been at Oracle, was like a VP of sales at Oracle. And so Oracle, of course, has this like horrible reputation in the industry for being like predatory licensing, very restrictive, like, oh, I see you're going to deploy our database on a machine with 40 CPUs and you're only going to dedicate 2 of them, but you got to pay us for all 40 because you might use all 40. They launched in 2000 on February 7th, 2000, and they made this event that they called, quote, the end of software. And then that March, they protested this Siebel Systems. They had a conference for Siebel Systems, and they hired these like fake actors to carry signs outside. And the protest was about this end of software. And I was like, wow, that is a weird tagline in 2000 and the .com, but like before software has really eaten the world. I mean, it's a big deal, obviously, in the 90s. It's like, what do they mean by this? At the time, they they had this idea of what we now call software as a service. So like, well, the end of software is you won't have to actually install it. You won't have to manage it. You'll go to like a website and you'll use it. And that was kind of a revolutionary idea in 2000. You don't own or run it yourself in a data center. You log into a web portal, you use it, and it's got functionality for their customers, right? And they committed really hard to this idea over the years. So they built their own app exchange platform in 2005. That seems pretty early, right? It predates iPhone by 3 years. At the time, people who wrote about this in the industry, journalists, they were like, well, it's kind of like iTunes or eBay, but that's because it's like, the App Store didn't exist yet. So there was like not much of an idea in the broader consciousness of what this even means. In 2006, they created Apex, which is their like proprietary Java. You can write this Java code on their platform. So you can write arbitrary applications on their platform. And they created Visual Force for like dynamic forms and larger applications. And this is 2006. So it's like the term low code hasn't even been invented yet. The term low code was coined in 2014. There's a company like Bubble, which makes these data-driven web applications where you can do it without writing any code. They didn't form for another 6 years. They formed in 2012. So very early on, Salesforce shows up with seemingly like a threat to software developers like us. Like, we don't need you guys anymore.
So I think of Salesforce as being sort of fundamentally a CRM platform. Was that what they said initially, or is that something that it evolved into over the time?
Kyle, if you want to jump in here, feel free. But from their history page, yeah, that was the plan from the beginning. We are going to be the CRM. You're going to log in, you're going to use it. You won't have to write any code anymore. But it's like, it's a weird story to me that very early on, they were pretty much trying to get rid of the experts you relied on to write code. Like, it's a surprising ambition. And my response is not to be like mad about that. My response is to be like, wow, that's really interesting. Like, you do need a lot of experts to write code. And what if you didn't need so many? But I also have this belief that it's maybe a quixotic pursuit. But Mike, to your question, from the beginning, they were like, yeah, this is going to be a sales platform. We're going to use it to keep track of customers. And oh, by the way, you could build any arbitrary computation on top of that using our proprietary tools. Kyle, what do you think about what we said so far?
Kind of a weird story I have to tell about how I went to my first Dreamforce, which was their conference of, basically people who develop on the Salesforce platform all get together and drink the Kool-Aid, talk about Salesforce and learn new features and things like that. And when I got there, the first thing I saw when I walked in the door of the conference was Sassy, the no-code mascot of Salesforce. This is their first mascot, and I'm trying to paint a picture for the listeners. It's the word software on a white circle, thick enough for a person to fit in because it's a mascot person, and then a big cancel sign over the word software. And when I walked in and saw that, I was like aghast. Like, who the heck is this? What is this, a protest? What? Like, I'm about software. Who is this guy? And my expectations when I went to Dreamforce were like Steve Ballmer in the Microsoft rally in like 2000, where he's like, developers, developers, developers.
He's dancing.
I'm expecting, Mark Benioff to get up on stage all sweaty to say that to me, and I was like, that sounds fun. Like, let's go. But then I see this guy, and I'm like, what the heck is this? I thought we want software. Like, this is software. Why did they say that? But now I think I just a little misunderstood of what the meaning of the end of software was. I was upset, because I was kind of young and like unsure of what they meant by that.
I got to tell you, I don't really think it's how do I put this? Like, I don't think it's that clear cut what they mean by the end of software, because you could look at that and say, look, you won't need software anymore except this insanely massive bundle of software that I'm going to sell you. Right? Like, the software hasn't ended by any means. I mean, there's more of it than there has ever been. So the idea of low code just fascinates me both in the implementation and the promise and the perpetual failure to live up to the promise. You won't need experts. You won't need software. Oh, but we still have software. Oh, but low code is going to replace the software. Oh, but it doesn't seem to. It's like this really interesting pursuit. Well, I'm getting ahead of myself here, Scott.
Let me ask a question since I'm the least Salesforce adept among people here. So my understanding is that there, at the time that I first encountered Salesforce, there were kind of two things that people used, maybe three. So there was Lightning, and I wasn't entirely sure what Lightning constituted. And then there was Apex. Is that right? So it wasn't that they had eliminated programming. They had just sort of provided tools within their platform to do programming. So it was what's the word I want?
A lie?
It was kind of well, yeah, it was clear that they were trying to market to people who are not developers. So I guess the distinction between Salesforce and more general purpose programming was that they still had all these programming tools, but they were all bundled within their environment using their database and their programming languages. And I asked the question mostly to get a sense of what was available to a developer, because they still, they were putting on a developer conference. So clearly they still needed developers. And I want to understand for myself and also paint a picture for people of what it meant to develop Salesforce at that time.
Kyle, why don't you tell us a little bit about what it's like building on the platform? Like, I don't know, maybe you could sort of reconcile these contradictions that we see in there,
Oh
or
yeah.
maybe not. Maybe that's just the nature of the beast. There's contradictions in there.
There are, it's like the platform is trying to kind of make developers unnecessary, but at the same time, I think we're going to all allude to that the more complex the business requirements are, the more likely you're going to want to use their proprietary language to develop these solutions. So I guess to answer your question a little more directly, though, what is it like? It's very very easy. You can you can deliver so much business value if you know what you're doing. You can like really automate, build business workflows super fast to the point where it's almost too easy and it gets monotonous. You're very, very powerful when you play within their walled garden of tools, I think. Super cool because kind of look like a rock star and that for your company, you're like, yeah, you need this like long multi-screen flow of different questions the user needs to answer and then compile all that data down to like a more visual representation of what the end user needs to see. It's like you can deliver so many features without having to write that much code or know that much about the underlying things going on below those features, which is kind of cool in a way.
Maybe if we can you tell us a little bit about some of the tools, like maybe some of the tools in the stack, I guess, of a
Yeah,
Salesforce developer. There's Salesforce admins, there's Salesforce developers. Mike referenced Apex, and he referenced Lightning. And maybe there's kind of a spectrum, right? Between like I'm writing something that is pretty much Java, pretty close looking to Java. And then there's stuff where it's like I'm clicking boxes and making programmatic stuff happen. Can you tell us a little bit about the tools, like name some of them and maybe describe
right.
just a little bit about what they're like and how you use them?
Yeah. So for flows, I'll get to flows in a second. There was the process builder, which is, as you can imagine, you come up with some trigger. I'm going to use the word trigger here. Like, say someone updates a field to this new value, you can like make a new box. It's like when someone sets this field, send an email to Greg about the field has been updated to this. You probably wouldn't know about that. That's a very basic example. Then the flows are took process builder and made it even more complex in a way. Like, they added new boxes and new types of boxes. There's not only, I think a good way to say a process builder, they're just DAGs in a way, but
Mm.
flows can have loops in them and assignment, and they can get so complicated. I've seen some that are so complicated. You're like, whoever wrote this is like, must have been a programmer at one point because, they're like getting way too way too advanced for anything I'd ever want to touch in a point and click drag and drop environment. But that's what Salesforce flows are. They're just sort of like a super powerful tool where you can like drag and drop UIs together and have users move throughout workflows and call out to other services like REST call outs and stuff like that. There's truly advanced features in these flows to the point where, yeah, I would say that anyone who gets really advanced in designing flows, I'm like, hey, buddy, I got something you're really gonna love. It's called Apex, and it's like way easier because you don't have to zoom around and scroll everywhere to like
Okay,
look for
okay,
these
okay.
things.
You just said the magic words that just tickled my brain. Like, oh, it's way easier if I just wrote this in code. This is like the rub with the low code. So low code, if you're a listener, you're listening to this, you've never seen a low code tool. Imagine like a graph, a mathematical computer sciencey thing, right? And each node on the graph represents almost like a function in a computer program, like something that's going to evaluate. And this makes sense because compiler writers, they use graphs to represent and interpret. People who are writing interpreters, like they use graphs to represent computation. So it totally makes sense. But you could make a visual thing, and let's say instead of moving the invocation of your function by cutting some lines of code text and moving it in your text editor, let's say maybe you just drag and drop the node. And Kyle, you're saying in Salesforce flows you can loop. Of course, you could always talk to the database. You can pull records out. You can operate on them, and each little node can do all kinds of different things. You mentioned you could do like REST calls in them. So it is computation without writing raw, what we think of as like a software application. Like you're not writing Java, you're not writing Java. And then what you said is, well, when people write these really advanced flows, you find it easier just to go, well, let's just write this in the Salesforce Apex language, which is a Java. And so Apex, can you tell us a little bit about that at all? I mean, do you write Java as well, or have you? And do you feel like it's seamless going back and forth between them, or is it pretty different from writing Java?
So I wrote Java strictly only in school. I made swing GUIs and stuff like that, and that was pretty painful in retrospect. But it was very easy for me to pick up because I think there's a lot of things in Apex that it's similar to Java in that the syntax is really very close. And the main difference, though, I think, is interacting with the database is super easy. You can write called SOQL, which is structured object query language. It's very close to SQL. It's all very intuitive to like and very easy. With one line, you can query the database and manipulate that data. And then with one simple keyword insert, you can create operation, update operation, just delete, things like that. Salesforce has this beautiful way of Salesforce lowers the barrier of entry to doing software engineering problems. Like you can solve software engineering problems by pointing and clicking. In a way, it's a project manager's dream, a product manager's dream by like being able to like, oh, I need to make this thing happen and I don't have a developer to help me. I can just like point and click this thing real quick. And then obviously when you get to the Apex side, it's like, oh, I need to just query the database and update these fields real quick. Or
Mhm.
it was a very, very welcoming, almost too easy entry into my career. I think it stunted me in a lot of ways because I kind of thought like, oh, this is all writing code is like it the way that you can just query the fields you need or make callouts super easily, not have to really worry about the authentication of the user or like configuring different roles or permissions was all very point and click and super easy. There's all kinds of things that Salesforce obfuscates or makes it very just below the even the developer level. I think you kind of don't have to know a lot about a lot of very important software engineering.
The thing that surprised me when I saw Apex, I was like, who imported all this shit? When I look at a module, if
Yeah,
I look at Java, it's like at the top, there's all this stuff that got it that's in like loaded into context
yeah, yeah.
that I can refer to. And it's like just stuff is just everything's just globally imported. You have no clue. Like you can call anything in the code base. But I did want to ask you. So another thing that Salesforce developers are always dealing with, that's kind of Salesforce platform is known for, there are limitations, right? I mean, like you're not deploying the code, they're deploying it. They're managing that runtime environment. You can't like tweak the JVM like you could with a Java program. You can't say I want, I need 8 gigs to run my Elasticsearch instance or whatever. Like you are subject to their laws. You're writing in their proprietary platform. Can you tell us a little bit about that? Like what are these limits that you have to deal with? And are there like tips and tricks for getting around them or things like that?
Yeah, and it's funny because when I got to Encino, this is my first like real professional experience, but I watched a lot of .NET devs come into this world of Salesforce, and they're always like, "What do you mean I have 10 megabytes of disk space? Like what? And what do you mean I can't like query as many times as I want or do like this crazy looping structure?" Like they get very upset. At least the ones I saw, they were very like they're upset with the fact that they don't have control over their deployments or how the code is running in the environment and stuff like that. And if you play within their limits or you write code in a way that doesn't ever endanger hitting those limits, it's very easy to not have problems. But of course, inevitably, as complexity grows, you're going to end up finding these limits or hitting these limits.
So there's like time limits on CPU, 10 seconds. And you can background stuff in Salesforce. There's async, right? There's an async context. So, and like they give you bigger limits generally with async. So 10 seconds CPU versus 60 seconds async. They have a heap size limit. So 6 megs heap size in sync and 12 megs async. So you can't write a program on Salesforce that takes more than 12 megs, I guess.
Just to be
Or gotta
clear, there are
break it
ways
up.
to overcome some of these limits.
What are you referring to there, Mike?
You just pay Salesforce more money.
Oh, no. Is
Yeah.
that true though with these governor limits? If you give them more money, will they give you more than 10 seconds? Because it's a multi-tenant platform.
I think it's just API limits, right? Where you can give them more money and they will give you more API calls.
Oh, I mean, they have ways of closing every door you think you could possibly open. You might be like, well, wait a minute. I got 10 seconds. Okay, let me just send this out to this developer in my company. He's got this service that's running on AWS, and they can do computation for an hour or whatever. But Salesforce is like, oh, but you can't send out. They limit everything. How many API calls you can make, how much memory, how much CPU, how many SQL queries, how many records you can update in the database. I mean, they are locked down. Is that right,
That's so
Kyle? Is
true.
that
Yeah. And
exaggeration?
no, not at all. It can be very jarring and kind of alarming for people, I think. In a way, it's better than like AWS just draining your wallet with when you do something expensive. Salesforce would just be like, no, you're cut off. Like we're letting you do that kind of crazy operation. We're gonna cut you off and you're gonna have to find some other way to write this or batch it in a way that, you're sacrificing time there by batching it and having it run whenever they choose to run this logic, which is kind of confusing and kind of hard to deal with at first. But I was born in it. I was molded by it. And I kind of didn't even know that there were alternatives, which kind of made me kind of corrupted my worldview of what software engineering is like.
There's so much interesting stuff that you've said already. But I want to take a little detour here because Salesforce did not invent the concept of low code. I thought it had been around a long time. Mike, do you know about this? Like, when was the first time you ever encountered low code or no code? Or maybe obviously not, those terms didn't exist until later.
So the first thing that I ever saw that I think qualifies in this category goes back to the late 80s, early 90s. I don't think it was the first thing necessarily, but there was a tool. We called it the Advanced Visualization System. I think it was actually the Application Visualization System, which ran on silicon graphics hardware. And the basic idea was that there were people doing certain types of scientific computations or things that required both considerable computation, but also they wanted to visualize that as maybe a volume visualization or a contour map or something like that. And so AVS was this system that was literally you put boxes on the screen and then connect the boxes by arrows, and that was the first time I'd ever seen that paradigm. I think this was probably around 1990. And it was quite popular. It had, I think it had all the limitations that we've since seen in every other low code system, which was that, inevitably not have some function available that you needed. And so you'd have to write your own code around it to support it. But it was a very popular way for end users who are not professional programmers who wanted to do visualizations because there were people who might have been doing molecular modeling or fluid dynamic simulations or things like that. And so they were relatively sophisticated computer users, but they were definitely not the sort of people who wanted to write their own visualization code. And so this gave them the ability to sort of plug in their simulation code and pipe it into something that would do a mesh of their data points, or a dynamic simulation of stuff that, molecules moving around in a box or something. And it kind of caught on. And I even know of one company that sort of borrowed the idea and turned it into a product that they used. It was a company that did sort of like drug discovery type work, and they turned it into a product that they used for essentially their whole platform for end users. I think that was the first thing I saw. And then probably another decade later, or maybe even earlier in the 90s, there was this trend of what they called rapid application development.
Yeah, when you look at the history of this term, that's what comes up, but I don't know anything about it. Did you interact with that? You had experience with it?
Yeah, there were two places where I kind of came in contact with it. One was, so I worked at a software company, but we would often do bespoke projects for other companies, and their internal programmers would be using things like VBA or Borland Delphi, another product which I think still maybe exists. The idea there, again, it's very visual. I think it's a little bit like the Salesforce Lightning thing, where you can kind of put a form on screen and move the elements around and then hook them up to callbacks and things like that. That was very popular inside companies that were doing a lot of internal software but weren't software companies. The other place that I saw this to some extent, and this is an idea that did not really survive, but in the days when UML was a new thing, there was this idea that you would be able to draw UML diagrams on the screen and turn that into software, and then take the software and modify it, and it would go back and change the UML diagram.
That sounds great.
It was
That didn't work though, did
it
it?
was an interesting idea which did not work. It kind of worked one way. You could sort of draw UML diagrams and get sort of a skeleton architecture out, but making it work in the opposite direction was essentially impossible.
Hmm. Kyle, I have a couple questions to follow up here from your experience. I know we've worked together, and I know you've worked outside of Salesforce, and when I look at you, you seem to me like any software engineer. You produce quality work. I have respect for the work you do. You pursue problems and you solve them. That's the job, right? You're doing the job. But you've mentioned a couple times you felt stunted by work. I mean, you also have a computer science degree, not that common among people I've worked with. So, what do you mean by that? Like, you felt stunted by working on a Salesforce platform?
I think a lot of it has to do with, I hear you guys talk about a lot about open source software and the local first movement and things like that. And I had never got to experience any of that. Everything's proprietary. There is no such thing as, you can't run Apex locally at all, even if you wanted to. I felt like I never got to play or experience a lot of these open source projects that I get to use on a daily basis here in my now more web development based role. And it's I felt like Salesforce, kind of hid me away from the more challenging, intricate parts of software engineering, like a lot of networking things, a lot of authentication proxies, reverse proxies, things like that. I never ever had to touch. And I know those are definitely more advanced things within software engineering, but if I stayed in Salesforce forever, I never would have had to experience that. And I think that would have greatly taken away from the true experience of being a software engineer.
It's a true experience. Ooh, that's a loaded one. I want to get there, but it almost like when you describe it that way, it's almost like this deal with the devil, right? There's certain things that are very easy to do on the platform. You can rapidly build certain kinds of applications, but you have to use a proprietary language. You're not going to run it outside of the platform whatsoever. You have to join this smaller group of maybe developers, right? I mean, there's some conflict in how you're describing that. And you have to deal with these limits as well. And, like maybe some of the knowledge you're gleaning is not going to totally translate to what happens outside the platform. And then you used a term which I find troubling, but very interesting. This is my Eric's therapy session where you're like, true software engineer. What's a true software engineer? Back to those guys in the cafeteria arguing.
Yeah, that's a great question. It's to me, it's someone who takes a look at the problems they have and the solutions that are out there that kind of sort of solve them. But that it's someone who, like, when I saw that you had modified or forked different open source repositories for our own benefit within the company, I was like, that's crazy. That's crazy. I want to do that. That's
It is
so
probably
cool.
crazy.
No, no, crazy cool. And like,
Not crazy cool, crazy, crazy.
like that to me is like that's what this is supposed to be like. That's what very high level software engineering is like. It's like I have this tool, it exists, but it's not quite perfect. I need to tweak it here for a couple ways to make it better for our use case. And that's kind of building on top of things that exist and making them even better for your purpose is like, whoa, that's really like powerful development to me, in my opinion.
There's so much underneath this discussion. But here's one other question I want to ask you about Salesforce, and then we can kind of talk more abstractly, I think. What's hard on the Salesforce platform? What things are really, really hard to do? And have you seen anything where it's just like, oh, this is like a massive, just spaghetti monster mess or a massive garbage dump fire? Like, what are the horror stories like?
So many, but obviously you can see how the more complicated a flow gets, you can divide a flow into subflows, right? And then there's you kind of that kind of solves the problem a little bit, but then you like clicking around and going to different flows and debugging each different part to find out where it aired out. It's not as easy as like writing code, and doing like global search in a repository is so helpful for debugging for me. And you can't really do that. I when I first came to a very complicated flow code base, I had to move it all into version control, even the metadata into version control. Like, how do you take a visual thing and put it into GitHub, right? It's all metadata at the end. So I was like, this is so hard to debug. I don't know if a field is being used in this flow or not, and if I need to change it here too. And so I one of the first things I like was advocating for is like we need to put all this into version control so I can do a command shift F and like find every version of everywhere this field is being used so that I know that I need to modify that flow too or something like that. That sucks. And yeah, obviously as when you start getting into looping and assignment and like call outs and flows, that's where I'm like, just I'm about to rewrite this. Like I can't even stand it anymore. But another thing that sucks on Salesforce is packaging. It you're super dependent on Salesforce for process, and like there's all kinds of like very mysterious bugs I've witnessed. There's a lot of it where I was almost in the week too young to, or I guess too naive to really understand what was going on. But I remember days where just we would on Salesforce support calls like all day, just trying to be like, why can't we create this package and what happened with our dependencies? Like we at Encina we had packages built on top of packages and dependencies, and it was a very complicated code base that because it was so large, it seemed like it was almost getting too big for Salesforce in a way. But
Wow, and because it's proprietary, you cannot peek into the guts of the thing that are failing sometimes. You cannot determine. Like, you don't have the power yourself. Like, when we're working on open source stuff, we could just keep going deeper and deeper and deeper, and, you wanna go really deep, you wanna look at system calls, go for it, The operating system's open source, Linux in our case, that we're deploying onto, like, you could just go deeper and deeper and deeper. Nothing stops you, and here you're saying you might hit bugs that you are not able to debug, and you have to get on a support call to have someone from the company hopefully call you back and solve your problem. It almost reminds me of the days of proprietary compilers. What do you think, Mike? Is that a fair comparison?
Well, it's definitely a fair comparison. I think proprietary compilers were probably a little bit more focused on one task than Salesforce is. Yeah, that would be hard for me since I have a hackery mentality. I want to know what's going on down to the electrons, and if I can't if I can't look at the pieces, it bugs me.
I I think that's the kind of often typical response of people who have done what you would, I guess, call traditional software engineering, like Mike and I, and from our backgrounds. We look at Salesforce and we go, ugh, I can't just go into the guts of the thing. You mean I can't just spawn a million threads stupidly if I want to make that? You're going to keep me from making mistakes. You're going to put a 10-second CPU limit on me. What am I, no longer a god here, going to the computation and I can do whatever I want? You're going to put these shackles on me. I can't fly anymore. Right? We get all pissed off.
One thing that I remember sort of anecdotally, having never done it firsthand, was that a lot of the pieces in Salesforce interact with each other. So if you say update some records with Apex, it might actually trigger a process builder or something like that. And like a process builder can trigger other process builders. And so I remember when Eric and I were working in this with this environment, we'd end up with these situations where you'd get these massive cascades of updates. So, we'd be sending signals out to other software in our cloud environment, and we'd get 30 different updates on the same record because of the interaction between pieces in Salesforce. And I don't know if that's just bad design by the Salesforce user or if it's just sort of an innate quality of the platform.
I was just going to say, I'm interested in Salesforce as an example of low code, and I'm interested in probably like the phenomenology of low code, like what happens when people talk about low code, how it gets sold, how it gets used, and the actual applications people build and how those things evolve over time. And I'll give you an example. So I at one point at the company Mike and I worked at here that he's talking about, I had to interview people for Salesforce developer positions. And at the time we had this like pretty gnarly, messy system Mike's describing where you would make a single change and it would fire out 30 changes as a result of that change because the person who had written that, not a software developer, they were what has been called the Salesforce admin. So they're not writing Apex, they're only writing through these like visual point and click tools. If this happens, click this box, this will happen after that. And I remember interviewing people and saying, hey, we have this system and it looks like this, and these are the problems that we deal with it. It's very complex and hard to understand. And 2-1, every single person I interviewed said, oh, yeah, that happens a lot on Salesforce. Like people start out with these, like they're easy to build and it's easy to apply, and they build a mess. And I was like, well, that's interesting from a phenomenological perspective. Like you're telling me here's a platform which says, look, it's so easy, so easy. And what happens over time is that people build messes. Now, that happens in software too, admittedly, right? Like the promise is over here. You won't need experts. You won't need software engineers. You could just use these really beautiful, easy tools. And the reality over here is like, yeah, we got pretty far with that. And then we had to add maybe Apex, we had to write software, or as we kept contributing and building, it just got gnarlier and gnarlier. And I'm in the background thinking, like, that's just like the law of the universe. Like, there's some sort of entropy rule in here. That's what fascinates me.
It's a very accurate take, and one I think we've both witnessed firsthand. Is it's so like, an addiction in a way too. You're like, oh, I can build all these business processes, and then the next thing you know, you have like 30 or 40 different business processes that start, I guess, converging together into like they're triggering each other and they're kind of stepping on each other's toes to accomplish different goals. And uh, just like how you can, if product managers wrote everything, they wouldn't always know about the other features. Programmers did this too, of course, but like they don't know about the other existing processes that are already in place. And as complexity grows like that, it's so easy for a Salesforce org to get overwhelmed. And it doesn't happen quickly. It can happen in over years. It happens faster than maybe writing advanced code or advanced system might happen, because
Hmm.
it's so hard to search and navigate through these flows, and they're very slow. You got to click the flow and scroll around in it. And I know that's exactly like the so what I think you guys prefer to do as people who are keyboard centric developers. It's funny that you even wanted to have me on here and talk about this because it's such the antithesis of what I think how you guys develop a lot, which is I don't want to touch my mouse. And Salesforce is like, touch your mouse, please, click everything.
I guess I'm interested in computation abstractly, and I'm interested in maybe there are some rules about it, like entropy, right? Like maybe it's just does not evolve towards simplicity, it evolves towards complexity. And maybe over here, they're saying it's the end of software, which is a beautiful, tagline. And in my head, I'm like, yeah, end of software. And I'm imagining Mickey like smashing the broom and it producing millions of tiny brooms that are filling the water buckets, right? The Sorcerer's Apprentice, like to me, that's how I see this story going. And I find it fascinating. Maybe I'm crazy out here on a limb. I don't know.
My experience with the sort of low code stuff in general is that it provides this promise initially of, hey, an end user can do programming. So you can take a subject matter expert or a product manager and they can do coding. And it actually works at the beginning. Eric and I have seen people who've done really impressive things with things like Bubble and Logic
I,
Logic
Logic
apps and
apps
Azure and things like that,
and Salesforce, and definitely
and
Salesforce too. Yeah,
Salesforce. And but my experience has always been that what happens is one of two things: either they reach a point where it becomes too complex, or there's something that just isn't available in the low code tool, and so it gets sort of transitioned into a dev team environment, and the dev team either says, okay, I will make that tweak and make it work, but then it becomes a dev team responsibility. Or the other fork that they take is they say, I don't want to work in this old environment, so I'm just going to rewrite this whole thing in general purpose programming environment. So I don't know if that's a necessary evolution or if it's just something that tends to happen because there's no well established rules about how to evolve low code, no code applications.
I kind of feel like there's a principle at work here, but
So I'm glad to be on here, but coming on here, it only wanted me to ask you guys further questions upon low code and no code platforms. And one of the first things I was I hate to ask, but like, you consider people who strictly build on no code or maybe low code platforms, are they software engineers to you? Like, even if they've never written a line of code, are they software engineers?
I am like pretty distrustful of gatekeeping, and I think that this term software engineer has the aura of gatekeeping around it, and maybe it's like overly noble sounding or some BS, but I feel like if you're writing complicated software on a low code platform, then certainly you could be a software engineer. Software engineering to me implies, if I take it as a sort of maybe flatter, unbiased term, it implies some sort of expertise, right? And the expertise is you have to know how people solve particular problems in order to apply those solutions in places where they are applicable. Not all solutions are applicable in every place. And an engineer knows how to determine this is good for this is good for that. And so a platform like Salesforce, which tries to abstract all these problems away, right? You don't have to worry about deployment. We'll take care of that. You just click this box. You don't have to worry about imports. You don't import anything. Don't worry about that. Everything globally imported. I think that, yeah, there are people who are building complex applications on Salesforce. They may not ever write code, and I wouldn't have any problem with calling those people software engineers. But there's a lot that the platform's going to abstract away from you. So your likelihood of interacting with solutions and the problems that I've dealt with over the last 15 years is reduced. And as you do not get a chance to have exposure to these things, like deployment as a problem, we always wish away deployment, like, oh, I don't, that's an afterthought. Who cares about? All I got to do is get the code there, right? No, it's pretty tough actually to get it there reliably. So as you reduce your familiarity with these solutions, these problems and these solutions, you need that familiarity to be a member of the trade. I think that would be my. I don't like the gatekeeping on one hand, but I think you need familiarity with problems and solutions to be a sort of in the guild.
It sounds like you're saying you have the title, but there are levels to it. You're like a level 1 software engineer or level 5. Not, and maybe that's gatekeeping too, but like it sounds like I, they are software engineer. They are software engineering, but they're not.
I think it's just tricky because engineering, software engineering is not well defined, and engineering itself is not even that well defined. I know there are certain people who will say that you're not a software engineer if you don't understand the basics of QA, and you're not a software engineer if you are not considering the security environment of the software that you're writing, and various other skills that you should have as to be qualified as an engineer. But I think, if you look at any other engineering discipline, there's almost nobody who works at every level. Like if you're a civil engineer, I don't know exactly what civil engineers do, but if you want to build on a road through a particular place, or if you want to build a building on a particular site, I'm assuming you don't have the geology expertise to understand if that is a good site to dig holes in. And so you probably have to go find some other expert to tell you if that's a good place to build your foundation. My experiences with this has been that I've run into a lot of people who use low code and no code tools, not exclusively, but as an adjunct to other software engineering. And I think this especially happens inside companies where software is not the product. So, for instance, the company that we all worked together at, software was not the end product of that company. And the stuff that was being done in Salesforce was vitally important to the function of the company. And so I don't think you can say that people who were making the company work better were not engineers. Whether they were just hooking up boxes or whether they were writing C code, I don't think you can really say that one of those is an engineer and the other is not. I mean, they may be different types of things. My view, I guess, from working with people in companies that are not software companies, that a lot of times those people are way smarter than I am. And they're not professional software engineers, but they're doing things that I simply could not do. And the fact that they're hooking up those pieces with boxes, arrows and boxes, is just certainly does not disqualify them from being engineers.
Yeah, I mean, that is software. They're writing and they're building software applications. Maybe writing is a metaphor here because if you're clicking and dragging or whatever, but that's not, there's no way I could look at that and say, that's not software. It is. You're building computation, right? And that is a complicated mental effort for anybody. And a couple things that came up when Mike was speaking is I'm reminded of two types of gatekeeping I've been on the negative side of. One, I still don't know all the Gang of Four patterns. I mean, I've read them over the years, but there's a couple, and there are people who look at me and be like, "That guy's not an engineer. He doesn't know the Gang of Four patterns." And like early in my career, I would interact with people who were like, "Oh, well, you're just working in Python, and that's not even a real language. It's like programmable pseudocode. It's too easy to be a programming language. To be a real programmer, you would need to know C." And I went off and had to learn stuff that I thought was harder because I was afraid those people were right. And here I am this many years later, like, that's bullshit. And I don't want to participate in that same kind of gatekeeping. But there's this gut response where it's like, well, you have to kind of know the tools of the trade in some areas. But I guess to Mike's point, you don't need to know all of them.
Those are both very good points, and yeah, I would have to agree with both of you in that whether you're pointing or clicking or if you're typing it, you are eventually going to run into the biggest prevalent problem of software engineering, which is growing complexity, and how do you manage growing complexity?
That's what interests me. Well, yeah, that like, and I think low code fascinates me because here they are. Salesforce is not alone in saying this is the end of software. You won't need these experts. It costs a lot of money to hire these developers. You won't need them anymore. They're not alone in making that promise, and they're not alone in seeing that promise be complete failure. Maybe even a lie in some cases. Like, it's just you might have developers that they just do something different now. I that fascinates me, that inherent contradiction. Like, we won't need software anymore. We're going to do it in this way. And oh, by the way, that's also software. And oh, by the way, we're going to have way more of the stuff than we've ever had in the past.
I think that tagline was super confusing to me always, and it's good to see that they're kind of maybe not exactly right. I mean, kind of contradictory for sure. All right, my next question for you guys is where do you see the future of low code, no code going? More widely used or fade away into the annals of history?
Don't like to make predictions because then I'm so easily shown to be wrong, and then it's like, wow, this guy doesn't know what he's talking about. I have no idea.
When I was starting out in the industry, I mentioned before I worked at a supercomputer center. The majority of the code was Fortran and it was scientific computing. And there was a guy there there was a debate at the time about whether Fortran was going to continue to be the language of choice for scientific computing because, C was becoming popular and people were starting to write certain things in C and even C++. And somebody had asked him, is Fortran going to go away? He made a comment that was something like, I don't know what language people will write scientific computations in 20 years from now, but I know it will be called Fortran. And so, his point being that, there are certain tools that are right for certain things and they will evolve over time to suit whatever new hardware and the new software stack is. And I don't know. I'm really bad at prediction. My track record is not good, but my guess is that the kind of low code tools that are common now will be a lot less common in 10 years. I think the AI coding tools are going to get better. I think the environments in which you do AI coding will get better. So, for instance, as an example, Eric was mentioning to me a week or so ago that one of his frustrations is that you can't really do two AI coding tasks at the same time because they kind of conflict with each other in the version control systems and they're trying to make, conflicting PRs at the same time. I think people will solve that problem. And I think there's going to be environments where you can sort of describe what you want and it's going to do things in parallel. It's probably going to look for multiple solutions to the same problem. It's probably going to have ways to optimize itself. There may even be systems where knowing what the software is supposed to do, it tries to optimize itself in the background while it's working or while people are using it. And I think it's going to be, all of this is obviously speculation, but I think that is not going to look like the box as an arrow type low code tools, but people may still call it low code or no code. I think it's going to be qualitatively different than what the popular low code tools now look like. And I will come back to this podcast in 10 years to demonstrate how incredibly wrong I was.
November 29th, 2036. We got to come back to this, Mike. I find this category just fascinating. When I write software for business applications, it's like I do want the business not to have to need me and other developers around to run the stuff and to make changes. Like I want to produce a beautiful finished statue that they can just do their businessy things on top of. Like I want to automate myself out of a job. And so like the idea of low code is like, yeah, let's make it even easier to produce the stuff. Let's make it so anybody could produce the stuff. Honestly, that kind of appeals to me. Well, I would love it if anybody could. I would love it if I didn't have to write lines of text in a text editor, if I could just, manipulate nodes on a graph or maybe even speak into a microphone. I would love all this, but I'm really interested in low code because you look at the history, the way it has appeared and what it's promised and what it's delivered, and it's like it sort of reveals itself as flawed, like it's self-deceiving in a way. I think it's kind of a quixotic pursuit. Like it's not really ever going to achieve the goals that the salespeople say it should. It's like a fantasy. It's a beautiful fantasy. It's like if you came along and you said, oh, I made this incredible tool and you can write abstract algebra with it. You don't have to even know abstract algebra. Anyone can write abstract algebra. It's like that, like, are we going to believe like, oh, cool, I can now write what do I want to write? Like, how do I do that? What am I trying to communicate? It's like the interface, the expression of the program. That's not what's hard about programming. Yeah, sure, like, people cultivate knowledge about keywords in JavaScript or Python or Java or whatever. That's, like, sort of a side effect of writing the crap over time. It's like the hard part is having to hold all of the variations in logic in your head. The way complexity just breeds complexity. Things don't get simpler over time. This is what's hard. And just changing the way I express the computation, not gonna change that. Changing a running software application, not easy, non-trivial. We like to believe it's trivial. It's not trivial. And so I think low code is like it's this beautiful, silly fantasy that I really love. But also maybe there's some Schadenfreude like, yeah, that's not going to work. Let's watch them try it again. That's kind of my take.
I think Salesforce is so smart in that they lower the barrier entry to design their business processes or a particular company's business processes on their platform. And then, like everything, as it grows, they have you hooked on their platform, and it's very hard to get out of. And they because they lowered the barrier of entry, everyone's like adding things to it and adding the complexity into the point where like it's gotten so complicated and big that we can't leave now. It's so tough to like get out or off of the platform once you've like sunk enough time into it, which I think is probably true for a lot of other low code, no code platforms that like that you mentioned before.
That's interesting. So it's like a deal with the devil. It's like the Faust story, you know? Suddenly your beloved is in jail or dead and dying at the end, and you're like, "Well, I gained all this knowledge, but what was it worth?" You have also done software engineering outside of Salesforce, and I don't wanna just straight up ask, do you prefer that? But you've also said, like, you felt stunted. Maybe by going outside the platform, you feel less stunted, I don't know, but what things appeal to you when you work on software applications outside of Salesforce? What's good about that? What are you getting, you think?
I think when I first started professionally writing more code outside of the Salesforce platform, I felt like I hate to use this analogy, but the allegory of the cave where I was like in Salesforce and like this is how you do call outs and this is how you would want to interact with a database. Like I think when I saw how you can do migrations in Postgres and like there's all kinds of different so many different tools that I never even knew were necessary for writing code and like deployment, like you said, deployment, like understanding that there's so much to deployment, like you said, that is so complicated and there's so much you need to understand about the networking parts of it. I feel like I've enjoyed experiencing and like opening my eyes to like, oh, this is what a lot of programmers are faced with. And like in order to build like a web app, it's not just about configuring the or like creating the logic that does what you ultimately want it to do. It's about like how you can have it run and run consistently without like a certain level of fault tolerance and like having things be really stable and hosted with minimal downtime. It's more fun when when you're closer to these open source tools. It's more fun when you're like the edge of what people are doing out there in the world. You kind of feel like you're exposed to things that people just created to put out for free. Like in Salesforce, everything's for profit. It's all about the dollar signs. Like I feel when you're writing code on like a web app or any kind of web development stack, you're kind of exposed to more of the fun, intricate problems that everyone's faced with that you don't know normally get to experience in Salesforce. I think that changed my mind about like this is more fun because I don't know. It's like a real problem. I hate to. I feel like I did not answer that question the way I wanted to.
No, you know what I love the most about your answer? You said, "I hate to use this," and then you gave us Plato's allegory of the cave, and I was like, "Oh my god, I love so much that he's talking about going outside of Salesforce. He's talking about Plato." That's funny, Kyle. That's really good. The allegory of the cave. Oh man.
Dealing with like various race conditions and like there are harder problems out there in the world than there were in the cave, and I think that's what excites me about it. That's what seeing these harder problems and being exposed to them makes me feel like, oh, this is like what my CS degree is really for. And I didn't get to use those kind of problems or experience those kind of problems very much in Salesforce. That's all.
Wow. That was
Maybe it's also just working with
beautiful.
you, Eric, you and Mike. I didn't get to work with Mike that much, but Mike, I do get to look at a lot of your code, and I have Git Lens where I get to see a lot of your that. Oh, Mike wrote this like 4 years ago. It's kind of funny to be
Sorry
like
about
That's
that.
why
listen
that's why
to.
this comment is so cynical. It must have been authored by Mike Mull.
No. No, it's truly an honor and a privilege to be able to maintain some of your code. So it's super cool to I like I get excited when I see that. I'm like, oh, this is something Eric wrote. Oh, I gotta be careful. Like, I'm sure it's probably right, but I gotta like I can't change it. So I'm afraid to change it.
You said something I find absolutely beautiful. There's harder problems than I ever found in the cave.
Yeah,
That
yeah.
that's what I want to end with here. That was just a gorgeous phrase. Thanks so much, Kyle, for coming on the show. Kyle Willcox today on Picture Me Coding. Thank you for coming.
Thanks for having me.
It was great to have you on the show. This has been Picture Me Coding with Eric Gaker and Mike Mull, and we will see you again in a few weeks.
See you next time.
Bye-bye.